Hello, BookTube. I've got a little bit of mail for you here. I got a lot of emails about the last mail-ish type video that I made. A couple of days ago, I did a video in which I showed you a lot of new arrivals, but I didn't open any packages on camera. And I went on, as I tend to do, on some of the reasons why that would be true. Some of the unpleasant surprises that I've been getting from things that I get in the mail, where, if the camera's rolling, it's like I've said for years now, you can't redo a mail haul. If you're opening packages, you can't redo that. A lot of you emailed me about some of the things that I was talking about in that video. A lot of you were very understanding, said, we'll take new releases, we'll take your thoughts on new releases, maybe institute some new kind of video where you look back on a month's new releases and talk about a few of them. Lots and lots of really good ideas that temporarily forgot that this is not a democracy, but a ruthless autocracy. That's okay. I will forgive it. I will overlook it. But I said in that video that I wouldn't abstain from opening packages just completely, and I'm not going to. I guess I just need to be warier about it. I mean, two of you actually pointed out, diplomatically, you weren't being mean about it, but two of you pointed out that really one size fits all solution to the problem of unpleasant surprises in a mail haul would be to do the idea that we had months ago, which is just control yourself. Just don't do a 40-minute rant. If you encounter something that is positing some poisonous, bigoted nonsense, simply blink a few times and say food for thought and move on. And you'll all know what I mean. We won't have to worry about it. Something like that I should certainly make that the rule. The last video that I made where I was showing you books I'd already opened, was mainly born of frustration over the last few attempts, not just the whole landscape of attempts. So I have a couple of boxes that we'll open here. But first, the mail, the periodicals, like, for instance, the Martha's Vineyard Gazette. This is a broadsheet newspaper from the island of Martha's Vineyard off the coast of Massachusetts. I am the book reviewer for the Martha's Vineyard Gazette, but I am not in this issue. But nevertheless, I was fascinated by a front page story. Look at that. How does the article read? Bats make a comeback on island. And this is one particular kind of bat that is making a comeback from one particular kind of disease. This is the northern long-eared bat, Myotis septentrionalis. This is one particular kind of bat that has been suffering lately on the island from white nose syndrome, from a kind of fungal infection that hibernating bats get all over the country. Their numbers have been decimated by this kind of fungal infection. They will roost by the hundreds to hibernate in mines or caves or whatnot. Of course, there are no mines or caves on Martha's Vineyard, so they roost instead in housing. They'll roost in your stone chimney or under the eaves of your house or inside the wainscoting of your house or something like that. There are all sorts of nooks and crannies they can get into. They're a fascinating species. Just fascinating. Septentrionalis is, well, first of all, they're a very stereotypical appearing bat. When you look at, they're adorable little things. When you look at one of them, it looks a lot like you would picture a bat to be. That and the little brown bat looks a lot like what you would picture a microchiroptera, echolocating bats to be. And also, they hunt in the shrubbery. They do a lot of hunting for insects on the ground and in dense forests, in dense foliage, which has given rise to a huge amount of research into the specific nature of their echolocation, which is obviously going to be different from an insect hunting bat that hunts in the air over desert, right? These bugs will locate their prey rustling around in foliage or in grass or through the thicket of moving tree branches. Utterly fascinating. The idea that they could be wiped out, the idea that this fungus could wipe them out. If this fungus attacks a whole colony of hibernating bats and doesn't spare any of them, you can wipe out a species like that in a few decades. And this article is very hopeful. It says that some bats are showing signs of recovering. Bat colonies are showing signs of recovering. So, although I was not asked to comment on the article, I was still happy to read it. That's just possible that I have done some studying of bats on Martha's Vineyard. But anyway, that was Martha's Vineyard. Then the Martha's Vineyard Gazette. Then we had the New Yorker, a new New Yorker, with one of their greatest cover artists. This is Peter Desev, and this is lemmings, of course, the stereotypical picture of lemmings running to the edge of a cliff and jumping off. But here it's high summer, and the lemmings are they're going to the beach. They've got coolers and this little thing in her dress with her pail. They're all with a surfboard. They're still jumping off en masse into the ocean, but they're as happy as could be about it. You could do a big book of this guy's New Yorker covers. They are all great. They've been great for 25, 30 years. For all I know, there might be a big book like that very much needs a place in my New Yorker cartoon collection and is not here. And this had lots and lots of good stuff. Jill Lepore has a long article in here about bears in America. It's in the book section. I scoured the thing trying to figure out whether or not it is actually the review of a book. Lots of books are mentioned. I don't think it's a review of any of them. It's just a meditation by Jill Lepore on bears in America, the different kinds of them, their history, the fact that in a lot of spaces in America they are making huge comebacks. Not just black bears, but grizzly bears as well. Black bears are kind of the coyotes of the bear world. If you have even a vaguely presentable ecological niche, they will make a comeback. They can eat lots of things. They can eat almost anything. They show up in the weirdest places. Grizzly bear is a little more specialized like that, and also, as we've mentioned on this channel a couple of times before, ever so much bigger and very, very angry. Grizzly bears are in a permanent bad mood. So if you're rounding the corner of your driveway in suburban Maryland or whatever, and you scare a black bear at the end of the driveway who's maybe interested in your garbage cans, the black bear is going to spin on its haunches and run away. And that black bear probably will be about roughly the same physical dimensions as you are. It'll be heavier, 200, 250 pounds, something like that. But about the same height if it were to stand all the way up, about the same arm length. It won't want any trouble from you. It will spin on its heel and run. If, by contrast, you were around that corner and a grizzly bear were at the bottom of your driveway thinking about your garbage cans, the grizzly bear stands maybe a 1 in 3 chance of, in that moment, deciding, garbage smarges, what about eating you? And the grizzly bear can get from the bottom of your driveway to you long, long before you can get from the corner to your door. Long before. A grizzly bear can run faster than a horse. The thing that people don't realize about grizzly bears, the thing that clueless tourists hiking in bear country for the first time ever invariably will tell their trail guide, well, if we encounter a grizzly bear, I'll just outrun it because they're big, pudgy animals. Or I'll climb a tree. We lose more tourists that way. You will not outrun a bear. But anyway, there was that, and that was in here. There was also a long review of the new Mission Impossible movie. I would love to read. I'm collecting reviews of it and reading what people think of it, this phenomenon of Tom Cruise. But it's a long review by Anthony Lane, so I'm not going to run the risk that I'll get 500 words into a 2,000-word review, and then he will start talking about pleasuring himself to Tom Cruise's motorcycle or whatever. He's not a trustworthy author, so I can't trust him not to write porn any more than I would trust Jeffrey Toobin on a Zoom call. So I just can't do it. But the Jill Lepore piece was interesting, and there was also a piece on the fall of neoliberalism. Maybe want to make a few phone calls. But there was also a letter here because Robert Gottlieb died. Those of you who are not really watchers of the publishing world might not know who that is, but it was a big deal in the publishing world. They don't get much bigger in the publishing world. And somebody wrote a letter, Dalton D-Land. I did not look on Amazon for Dalton D-Land, but he wrote a funny letter. I was tickled by David Remnick's description of Robert Gottlieb in his tender reminiscence as, quote, mindful of the anxious writer waiting by the telephone. I was the exception that proved the rule. When I was a student at Princeton, Gottlieb's wife, the actress Maria Tucci, was a friend of a friend, and through this channel I passed along the manuscript for a novel I had written, one befitting a young man with more ambition than talent. Weeks of waiting turned into months. I acquired a literary agent who insisted that we not approach anyone else until we heard from Gottlieb, and so eventually I called Gottlieb's office. He came right on the line and promised that he would call me back the next day. He was true to his word. When he rang, he confessed that, on the evening he received my manuscript, he had been determined to fix the wobble in his nightstand, and my pages had fit perfectly under one leg. I asked if he might not care to read my book, but he told me that, as much as he'd like to, the cat had peed on it. There are worse ways to learn that you have not written the great American novel, and at the very least, I discovered that I had feline fans. Now, Dalton Deland says in this letter that he got a literary agent, so maybe he actually got a book published, maybe that book published. The fact that he's an author and admits to it makes me think that none of that anecdote happened. It seems a little bit too on the nose. But if it did, I would wonder at Gottlieb's tone. I mean, Gottlieb was many things and could occasionally be a fierce, navel-gazing a-hole. But telling a hopeful, aspiring author against whom you have no axe to grind that you can't read his manuscript because a cat peed on it, that doesn't sound like anything that the man would say. Especially not without a follow-up, like send me another copy or something like that. But a funny anecdote anyway. And then we'll get on to the mail. And there's one thing that I opened off camera I want to show you about because some of you are true crime fans. This comes out in October. This is While Idaho Slept by J. Reuben Appleman. About true crime. Sounds like it will be really, really good. Just after 4 a.m. on November 13th, 2022, 4 University of Idaho students were viciously stabbed to death in an off-campus house. The killings would shake the small blue-collar town of Moscow, Idaho, dominate mainstream news coverage, and become a social media obsession, drawing millions of clicks and views. While a reticent Moscow police department, the FBI, and the Idaho State Police searched for the killer, unending conjecture and countless theories blazed online in chat rooms and platforms from Reddit to YouTube to Facebook to TikTok. For more than a month, the clash of armchair investigators and law enforcement professionals raged until a suspect, a 28-year-old PhD candidate studying criminology, was arrested at his family home 2,500 miles away in the Pocono Mountains of Pennsylvania on the day before New Year's Eve. So that sounds fascinating anyway. I remember this story, but the element, I don't know if it's just the publicist stressing that element in the cover copy, or if they're stressing it for a reason. They've read the book, and I haven't. But I like very much the subtext there of this being a true crime story and that heavily involves the rampant online speculation that is now an inevitable feature of a true crime, a grisly murder investigation is now going to have that. That's going to be an element in true crime stories that either the true crime writer will ignore or they will play it up because it's often fascinating. Sometimes it even affects the investigation. Like, for instance, did law enforcement find that 28-year-old in the Poconos? Or did they find it with a tip from that febrile conversation online? I'm hoping that there's at least a bit of that in this book because that strikes me as fascinating. I think that's the future it's absolutely inevitable. Now, I just wonder, part of me wonders if police departments all over the country are going to downplay that element so as not to draw attention to the fact that their closure rates on murder cases, especially high-profile murder cases like this one, is abysmal. Check the stats for your own police department. If you live in a city, if you live someplace that has murders, check the stats on your police department. Ask what their closure rate is for homicide. If it's anything like Boston or most cities that spend millions or even billions on their police department, you will find that the closure rate for homicides is 20%, maybe 30%. For something that's getting the budget of a small nation that is, according to the stats, is demonstrably bad at what it does. And I'm looking forward to the book. I'm not going to read it until October, but I'm looking forward to it. Then we'll do this first. We've got just 2 boxes here. I don't have a whole pile of packages. We've just got a couple of boxes here. Let's see what this first one is. Oh, it's 2 books. Oh my. Okay. Great. Here, let's get you where we can see you. This is Shimmering Details. It's a gigantic memoir by Peter Nadas, translated by Judith Solossi. 2 huge volumes of Shimmering Details. Gigantic. Due in mid-November. The titular Shimmering Details of Peter Nadas's memoir are those concrete moments, the firmly embedded and voluntary and involuntary memories that take pride of place in our sense of personal history, the smells, sounds, or sights that ineluctably draw us into a fully realized scene of our own adolescence, young adulthood, or any other moment from which we have a particular temporal distance. The author approaches these memories, building on his memoir around them, as if there had never been anything else, hoping to avoid the retrospective winnowings of meaning that allow us to constrict a tidy autobiography. Okay. Instead, the author uses a sort of Freudian dream interpretation to scrutinize his own memory, proving cause and effect, the stories told to himself, by himself and others, to offer steady, centrifugal movement towards meaning. This sounds unbearable. It's not the publicist who's writing this sheet. It's not their intent, but they're making it sound unbearable. Just unbearable. Let's see here. The first volume, the author authors a portrait of his childhood and the history of his family immediately preceding his birth in 1942. Okay. Can't write a memoir of things you don't remember. Okay. All right. So part of this is not a memoir. A huge chunk of volume 1 is family history. Okay. All right. And then the second volume takes the author through the Second World War, the Hungarian Revolution of 1956, and beyond. And they were both of these volumes were translated out of the Hungarian by Judith Selassie. Okay. This author wrote a gigantic book called A Book of Memories that I loved. It was translated into English, and I loved it. And it was probably this size when you put these two things together. It was a huge thing. I keep looking for it at the Brattle. Every once in a while I see it, and I think it's too heavy. I'd have to lug it home, but I really want a copy of it. But great. This comes out in late November. 2 big volumes. One of reconstructed family history and one of actual memoir. So fantastic. Great. Although, again, it's November, so I don't have to think about it yet. I don't have to concentrate. And then this final box, which is giving me all sorts of the feels. I'm thinking that this is oh no. Oh goodness gracious. It's sealed. Here, I don't have scissors near me. Fortunately, I have this right near me, which is sharper than any scissors could be. Let's cut our way into this box here and see what we have. I think I know what this is. But I'm going to have to entertain you with snappy patter while I get inside this box. This knife will not let me down. It doesn't let me down at all. Let's put this away. This was donated involuntarily to me years and years ago. What can I say? I am old and frail now, but I wasn't always so. And if you're going to, even now, if you're going to pull a knife on me in public, if especially you're going to threaten my girls, you'd better be prepared. That's all that I wanted to say to that kid at the time. Yes, okay, this is what I thought. This is a computer. This is a MacBook. So we have the power brick and the cord there, but let's get the item itself here. Fantastic. Okay, so let's make sure that we've got everything we need here before we slide this thing out. Yes, okay. This is an 11-inch MacBook Air. Mid-2013. This is the power prong for it, not USB-C, just one of these things here. This is mid-2013, a real workhorse of a device, and light as a feather. These 11-inch devices. I have determined through countless experiments with all kinds of tech that 11-inch is pretty much my ideal size, whether it's the smart keyboard on my iPad or an actual MacBook or a Chromebook. I have them in all sorts of sizes, except for larger than 15 inches. 15 inches or larger, I've never tried. There could be a promised land. But 11 inches feels really comfortable, and I've never really understood why that was until just a few months ago. I was thinking about it, and I thought, well, okay, that's not only roughly the size of a sheet of yellow legal pad paper, but also roughly the size of a manual typewriter. You put an 11-inch MacBook on a stool and sit in front of it, it's going to feel very much like the dimensions of a manual typewriter. And the reason I bring that up is because despite my wavy hair and my 8-pack abs, I did a huge amount of writing on a manual typewriter once upon a time. I rail against them now because they are the pinnacle of pretension now. When I was doing all of that typing on a manual typewriter, there were no computers outside of Palo Alto. There was no internet. The whole point of writing is to share what you write. Can't share what you write on a manual typewriter except by adding 5 or 6 different steps after that. When I was using that manual typewriter and pounding away on it, I dreamed in my mind of some sort of Star Trek science fiction technology that would remove all of the problems. It wouldn't be so heavy. This is the same weight as the wood and metal clipboard that I used at the time. Same weight as the clipboard. More computing power than... I dreamt of something that would not be as heavy and cumbersome as my manual typewriter. I dreamt of something where my fingers could not get lodged and lost inside the keys. Flat keyboard on this thing. Almost flat. And no spaces between the keys. Right? There are no spaces between these keys. Here's the key, and there's the metal bracing of the key. It's a fraction of an inch. Shallow as could be. I dreamed that, most of all, since I'm a terrible typer, I dreamed of being free from whiteout or correct type. Those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, if you were born in the 21st century, you won't know what I'm talking about. But you had keys covered in ink, keys striking an ink ribbon and making that letter on a page that you rolled into the typewriter. If you made the wrong letter, if you struck the wrong way, if you made a mistake typing, you had to stop what you were doing, put a sheet of whiteout paper in there, hit that same key so that the groove where the ink had gone would now be covered in white, and you could type over it. Or you would use this liquid blobby type stuff to do the same thing. A nightmare. It was a nightmare. Try doing that if you have 1,000 words to do in one day and you don't have any sense of touch. It's a nightmare. Absolute nightmare. Inevitably, I would be really careful. I was 10-finger type. I never could figure out how to do any 2-finger typing. I would inevitably be really careful. I would get to the last line of a page and I would make a mistake on the last line. And I'd be out of whiteout, or I wouldn't have any correct type or anything like that. I would just have to type the page over again. Just have to take it out and type it again. And even once all those pages were typed, they were just a pile of pages. They were just a pile of pages next to my stool. I still had to do something with them. I had to take them somewhere, photocopy them, in order to share them. Typing them on a manual typewriter was not even a first step towards any of that. So all this has a backspace key. Nothing is committed here. It's all happening in circuitry. So I'm not committed to any of the typing mistakes that I make. I can fix them all. If you had told me back then, 50 years ago, that I would live long enough to see a device that would have all of those superiorities, I would have kissed you on the mouth. I would have said, I'll do anything. I'll pay you. What could such a device possibly cost? Probably $100? I'll pay $100. I would never have guessed that they would cost $1,500, since that's what a house costs. But if you had told me back then, well, the day will come when you can spend $120 and get that, I'd have kissed you on the mouth. I'd have said, that is the best news I've ever heard. I'm so happy about that. And then, as an afterthought, you would have told me, oh, and by the way, it's also a movie theater, and TV, and a camera, and mail. No more going to the mailbox. No more waiting 3 days for a response. No more postage. It's all of those things. And plenty of other things, too, that you're not going to use it for. I'd have been blown away. So I'm going to have to dig into this thing and customize it, make sure that it behaves. Of course, the number one thing that I will do, and I'm not getting my hopes up at all, the number one thing I will do is test to make sure that it is not password protected. If the device is password protected, if I power it up and try to turn it on and it gives me those 2 bars, login and password, and I don't know that information and the seller doesn't know that information, then this is a paperweight. If it was sold by, a middle school in 2013 to some third-party seller who then sold it to some other third-party seller, sat in their basement for 10 years, and then was sold onto the eBay market. There is no way to recover that login, and there's no way to get around it. So we'll see. I mean, the thrill of having this neat little device, it could quickly die. It could flame out on the launch pad. That happens way too often. The only difference being between now and years ago when that happened is that now I don't take it. So if I power this thing up and I find out that it's password protected, and I find out that the seller doesn't know the password and knew they didn't know the password when they sold the thing to me, knowing, in other words, that it's completely useless to me, well, I now have a little bit of form in this regard. I do not want my money back from that seller. I want my money back, and I want that seller off eBay. I want them out of business. I want their store closed on eBay. Not just to me, but to any customer. I want eBay to shut them down and deny them access. And if eBay doesn't want to do that, well, I've already gone through this with them. We will see. I'm hoping that I have found an exception. I'm hoping we'll see. Great. All right. So tech. I've got tech. Great. I have 2 hours of stuff to do. 2 hours of work to do. And then this is typically another 2 hours with a device like this. You power it up. For me, it's typically about another 2 hours. You power it up. If it's not password protected, if I actually do have access to it, well, then I've got to go through it and customize it, fix it, download a whole bunch of things. I have to download Google Chrome. I have to download OpenOffice, the writing program that I use. I have to download a bunch of other things too. We will see. Business before pleasure. So stuff to do first and then that. But we still had lots of interesting stuff to look at. A slim volume of true crime. All of it's in the fall, so I don't have to worry much about it. And then Peter Nadas's Shimmering Details in 2 huge volumes, both of which are called a memoir. But you can't write a memoir about your parents' childhood. But we'll see. This author, I really like this author. Talk about credit in the Bank of Steve. So great. But in any case, the mail today, although we did successfully open it on camera, it doesn't affect my nighttime reading, my immediate TBR at all. So it's wide open for other things. So I'm gonna close this for now, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.